This grandmother was publicly humiliated by her daughter-in-law, who kicked her out of a family photo, calling her a bad aesthetic. The daughter-in-law thought she had won posting the perfect family picture online for everyone to praise, but she had no idea her mother-in-law was sitting on $1 million secret, and she was about to use the church pastor to get the most epic and public revenge you have ever seen. It was the kind of late August day that makes you believe in grace the sky a deep, cloudless blue, and the air sweet with the smell of freshly cut grass and grilling hot dogs. Every year, the Grace Lutheran Church picnic felt like a town-wide family reunion, a comforting rhythm in the life of our small Ohio community. I walked carefully across the lawn, balancing my famous lemon meringue pie. The meringue was toasted to a perfect golden brown, and I felt that familiar little thrill of pride knowing it would be gone in under an hour. Checkered blankets dotted the park like a patchwork quilt, and the sound of children's laughter was everywhere. I saw my son Mark over by the big oak tree with his wife Amelia and my two beautiful grandchildren. A wave of love washed over me, so pure and simple it almost hurt. Mark saw me, and his face broke into a genuine warm smile as he came over to help. He gave me a hug that felt like home, telling me the pie looked like a prize winner, as always. Amelia glided over a moment later. Her smile was dazzling, a perfect bright white thing she aimed at me like a spotlight for everyone to see. She called out loud enough for the ladies at the next blanket to hear that Mom had brought her legendary pie. And wasn't that just wonderful? She has a way of saying, Mom, that makes it sound less like a relationship and more like a role I'm playing in her production. She took the pie from me and placed it on their blanket a little too far from the one where the mayor's family and the new doctor were sitting. Over the next hour, I felt the gentle but firm hand of Amelia's direction. When an old friend Martha stopped by and I started telling a funny story about Mark falling into the creek as a boy, Amelia laughed a little too quickly and changed the subject, asking Martha about her recent trip to Florida. My story was left hanging in the air, an unfinished, clumsy thing. She steered me into conversations and away from others, all with that brilliant, unassailable smile. I was an accessory to be managed, a quaint piece of furniture to be placed just so, to complete the picture of a perfect multi-generational family. Mark, bless his heart, didn't seem to notice. He was just happy to be there, eating a burger and tossing a ball with his son. He's a good man, my son, but his desire for a peaceful life sometimes makes him blind to the price of that peace. At one point, I looked up and caught the eye of Pastor David. He was deep in conversation with a county commissioner, but he saw me. He saw the whole scene, I think. He didn't smile, not exactly, but he gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was a look of deep, knowing friendship, a silent acknowledgement between two people who had known each other for 50 years. It was a small anchor in the shifting social currents of the afternoon, and I felt a little bit of the tension in my shoulders release. A little while later, Amelia mentioned she needed extra napkins for the kids, who were covered in watermelon juice. I told her I had some in my big carry-all bag, and that I'd be right back. I walked over to the spot where I'd left my bag tucked away, behind the broad trunk of the old oak tree for shade. As I bent down to rummage through it, I heard Amelia's voice, low and urgent, coming from the other side of the trunk. She was talking to Mark. I froze, not meaning to eavesdrop, but her words caught me like a fishhook. She said she had to get the photographer before he left for the day. She needed a perfect shot of just them for the Christmas card. I heard Mark ask why I wasn't in it, and her reply came out in a sharp, impatient hiss. She said his mom just didn't fit the aesthetic she was going for this year. For a moment, I just stood there behind the solid trunk of that old oak tree, the rough bark pressing into my back. The world seemed to go quiet, except for the rushing sound in my ears. Doesn't fit the aesthetic. The words were so cold, so clinical. It wasn't an angry outburst. It was a judgment, a verdict. I was a piece of decor that clashed with the new furniture. My first instinct was to shrink away, to slip back to my car and drive home, leaving my half-eaten plate of potato salad on the picnic blanket. Let them have their perfect picture. Let them have their perfect life scrubbed clean of any detail that didn't fit. But then a different feeling rose up from somewhere deep inside me. Something hot and sharp that burned away the chill. It was the memory of my late husband, Frank. He never cared for aesthetics. He cared for things that were solid, things that were true. He would have told me to stand tall, to never let anyone make me feel small. So I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped out from behind the tree, my face arranged into a pleasant, neutral mask. Just as I rejoined the daylight, Amelia spotted the church photographer, a nice young man named Kevin. Her eyes lit up, and she waved him over with a theatrical gesture. Then she turned to me, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, calling out across the grass for everyone to hear. She said my name, asking me to come for a family picture. It was a dare, a challenge wrapped in a lovely bow. She was daring me to make a scene, to react to the words she thought I hadn't heard. I saw Mark shift uncomfortably. He knew. He had to know this was cruel. I looked at my daughter-in-law, at her bright, expectant face, and I decided to call her bluff. With a calm smile, I walked over to join them. Kevin, the photographer, was all business, arranging us with professional ease. He put me right in the center, a grandchild on either side of me, with Mark and Amelia flanking us. For one ridiculous second, it felt real. It felt like a family. He lifted his camera, telling us to smile, and that's when Amelia made her move. She gently placed a hand on my arm, a gesture that looked like affection to anyone more than 10 feet away. But I felt the steel in her fingers. In that same soft, considerate voice, loud enough for the nearby families to hear, she told me something I will never forget. She asked ever so sweetly if I would mind stepping aside for a moment. She just wanted one of the core family. The words hung in the humid air, brutal and precise. Core family. I was no longer core. I was crust. I was rind. I was something to be trimmed away and discarded. The world seemed to slow down. The laughter of the children faded. I felt the eyes of the people on the blankets nearby. They'd heard. Of course they'd heard. They were trying so hard not to look, which is how you know everyone is looking. I could feel a hot blush creeping up my neck, a deep, painful shame. This is what Amelia wanted. She wanted to see me flustered, to see me hurt. She wanted me to cry or argue to prove that I was the difficult, overly sensitive old woman she made me out to be. But Frank's voice was in my ear again, telling me to stand tall. I looked directly at Amelia, past her glittering smile and into her cold, calculating eyes. I gave her a small nod. I even patted her hand, the one still gripping my arm. I told her, my voice surprisingly clear and steady, that of course it was fine. She should get the picture that she wanted. Then I turned without a single glance at my son and walked away. I didn't stumble. My back was straight as a ruler. Each step was a small victory. I could feel their surprise behind me. This wasn't in Amelia's script. My quiet compliance was more of an accusation than any angry words could ever be. I had refused to play my assigned part. I hadn't gotten more than 20 feet when a figure stepped into my path. It was Pastor David. He had seen it. His kind, weathered face was etched with a deep concern that was so genuine it almost broke the dam of my composure. He didn't say much. He just gently placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple public gesture of solidarity. He asked me quietly if I was all right. As I looked back for just a second, I saw Mark and Amelia staring at us. The triumphant look was gone from Amelia's face. In its place was a flicker of something else, something I recognized all too well. It was fear. They hadn't won. They had just started a fight they had no idea how to finish. The phone call came 2 days later. I saw Mark's name on the screen and let it ring 3 times before picking up just to give my heart a moment to settle. His voice was laced with an awkward, forced cheerfulness. He asked how I was doing, how my week was going, the conversation circling the real issue like a nervous bird. Finally, he got to it explaining that Amelia felt just terrible about the whole photo incident. He said, and I remember the words exactly, that I know how she gets about things like that, how she wants everything to be perfect. He told me she didn't mean it the way it came out, that I was being a little too sensitive about it all. It was a masterclass in non-apology. Every word was designed to manage my reaction to paint their cruelty as a simple misunderstanding and my hurt as an overreaction. He wasn't sorry for what they did. He was sorry that I was upset. The old me, the me from last week, would have smoothed it over. I would have told him it was all forgotten, just to ease the discomfort in his voice, to restore the peace he so desperately craves. But something had hardened in me. I listened quietly, and when he was done, I simply told him that I understood. I didn't say it was okay. I didn't say I forgave them. I just said I understood. And the line went quiet for a moment before he, sounding immensely relieved, said he knew I would. He mistook my calm for surrender. That Sunday at church, I knew they would be watching me. I chose my Sunday dress with care, a simple but elegant floral print Frank had always liked. I walked into the sanctuary and saw them standing in the narthex talking with some other young couples. Amelia saw me first, and a flicker of anxiety crossed her face before being replaced by that brilliant public smile. Instead of waiting for them, I walked directly over. I smiled politely, told Mark he looked handsome in his suit, and then I turned to his wife. I complimented her on her dress, a stylish thing that must have cost a pretty penny. I asked after the children and listened with pleasant interest as she recounted a story about my grandson's soccer game. I could feel the relief coming off of her in waves. She thought she had won. She believed my quiet civility was proof that I had accepted my place, that the brief storm had passed, and she was once again in control of our family's narrative. Mark squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of gratitude for my making things easy. They thought I had folded. They couldn't have been more wrong. I was simply setting the table. After the service, I skipped the usual coffee hour and went straight to Pastor David's office. It's a comfortable room filled with books and the scent of old paper and peppermint, a place of counsel and quiet conversation for over 50 years. He closed the door behind us, and the air of pastoral pleasantries vanished, replaced by the comfortable frankness of old friendship. He told me straight out that what he saw at the picnic was wrong and that he was disappointed in Mark for letting it happen. Hearing that from him, hearing that validation was like a soothing balm on the wound. Then his tone shifted. He gestured to a set of architectural drawings pinned to a corkboard. They were for the new children's wing, a project I had funded entirely, with a gift from Frank's estate, a gift I had insisted remain anonymous. He told me the construction was complete and that the dedication ceremony was scheduled for the Founders' Day picnic in 2 weeks. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He said he remembered my reasons for wanting to remain anonymous, that true charity seeks no reward. He was giving me an out. He was asking if I was sure if this was truly the path I wanted to take. I thought of Amelia's cold, dismissive words. I thought of my son's weak excuses. I thought of 50 years of trying to be small and agreeable to keep a fragile peace. The peace had been an illusion all along. I looked at Pastor David, the friend who had christened my son and buried my husband, and my voice was firm without a trace of the woman who had cried behind the oak tree. I told him yes. I told him it was time. I wanted him to tell the whole town who had built that wing. Let them hear it. Let them all hear it. A plan was now in motion, and a quiet, unshakable resolve settled over me. They thought I was beaten, but I was just getting started. The days following that Sunday at church were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The house felt large and empty, filled with the ghosts of a life that seemed to belong to someone else. I spent my time tidying things that were already tidy and tending to my small garden. I suppose I was waiting. I wasn't sure for what exactly, but it felt like the world was holding its breath. One evening, feeling a familiar pang of loneliness, I decided to open my laptop. It was a slow and clunky old machine, but it was my window to the world, my way of seeing pictures of the grandchildren without having to navigate the minefield of an actual visit. I clicked on the social media icon, and after a moment of loading, the page flickered to life. I saw pictures of a friend's new puppy, a neighbor's vacation to the Grand Canyon, and then I saw it. There on my screen was the picture. It was professionally edited, the colors saturated to a level of impossible perfection. The grass was a vibrant green, my grandchildren's smiles were dazzling, and Amelia and Mark looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. It was the picture I wasn't in. My breath caught in my throat. It was one thing to be excluded in the moment, but it was another thing entirely to see that exclusion polished, perfected, and presented to the world as the complete and ultimate truth. Underneath the photo, Amelia had written a caption. It read, "So blessed to celebrate community and family at the church picnic. Feeling so grateful for my amazing little unit. Hashtag family first. Blessed." An amazing little unit. A unit that had a piece missing. Me. Then I made the mistake of reading the comments. A waterfall of praise poured down the page. "What a beautiful family," one person wrote. "You guys are picture perfect," said another. A woman from Amelia's book club commented, "Amelia, you are glowing. Such an inspiration." Each comment was a small, sharp sting. The community was applauding a lie, celebrating a carefully curated fiction, while I, the ghost at their digital feast, sat alone in my quiet house. As I stared at their smiling faces, my mind drifted away from the glowing screen and back through the years. I thought of Frank, my late husband, coming home with his hands calloused and his back aching from the construction sites. I thought of the risks we took, the tiny house we lived in for a decade, the old beat-up car we drove, all so we could pour every spare penny back into the business he was building from nothing. The money that paid for Amelia's designer dress and Mark's expensive hobbies, the money that would one day be their inheritance, wasn't just money. It was our life. It was Frank's sweat and my sacrifice, decades of careful, quiet work. And I thought of the church wing. When Frank passed, I had taken a significant portion of his estate, over $1.2 million, and given it to the church to build the new children's wing in our family's name. It was supposed to be a quiet legacy, a testament to a life of hard work and faith. I had insisted on anonymity because that's what Frank would have wanted. True generosity, he always said, doesn't need a plaque. Looking at that photo, at that lie, I realized they weren't just disrespecting me. They were dancing on my husband's grave. They were taking the fruits of his labor, the security he had bled for, and using it to build a perfect false life, all while cutting out the very person who held his memory. The hurt I felt was no longer just a personal sting of rejection. It was a deep, sacred anger. They had desecrated something holy. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and I was left in silence. The phantom glow of their perfect life still burned into my vision. The shaking in my hands had stopped. The sadness had been burned away, leaving something cold and hard and clear in its place. I picked up the phone. I knew it was late, but I also knew Pastor David would answer. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. My voice sounded different even to my own ears. It was steady, without a hint of the gentle, accommodating woman I had been my whole life. I told him I had just seen a picture online. I told him that I was more certain than ever. Then I added a new instruction. When he made the announcement at the dedication ceremony, I wanted him to be sure to mention the full amount. I wanted the community to understand the scale of the gift. I wanted them to know what real family legacy looked like, not the cheap, filtered version they were applauding online. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Pastor David simply said, "Of course, Carol, I understand completely. The decision was made. The final piece was in place. The reckoning was coming." The 2 weeks leading up to the Founders' Day picnic passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. It felt like watching a summer storm gather slowly on the horizon. You see the clouds building, feel the change in the air, and you know that lightning is inevitable. When the day finally arrived, it was bright and beautiful, a perfect day for a reckoning. The whole town, it seemed, had turned out. The new children's wing stood gleaming, a crisp banner proclaiming its dedication stretched across the entrance. I found a folding chair under the shade of an old maple tree, a good vantage point to see both the podium and my family. Mark and Amelia arrived in their usual whirlwind of social grace. They were dressed in coordinated pastel colors, looking like a page from a catalog. They worked the crowd like seasoned politicians, shaking hands, laughing, accepting compliments on how wonderful they looked. They gave me a quick, distracted wave, the kind you give to a distant relative you're obligated to acknowledge. They were so confident, so secure in their place at the top of the church's social ladder. They believed the unpleasantness of the last picnic was forgotten, a minor blip that I had in their minds rightly gotten over. They had no idea they were standing on a stage, and the final act was about to begin. When the time came, Pastor David walked up to the podium, and a hush fell over the crowd. He was a master of public speaking, his voice calm and resonant, carrying an authority that everyone respected. He started his sermon by talking about the importance of family, of community, of building a legacy for our children. He spoke of the joy of seeing the next generation grow strong in their faith, and then he gestured broadly in the direction of my son and his wife. He mentioned how wonderful it was to see families like the Millers, so vibrant and devoted, a shining example of the church's future. He even made a light comment about the beautiful family photos people share, a testament to their happiness. I watched as Amelia preened, a self-satisfied smile gracing her lips. Mark looked proud, basking in the public praise. They were soaking it in, completely oblivious. Then the pastor's tone shifted. It was a subtle change, but I felt it instantly. He paused, letting the silence hang for a moment. He said that while beautiful pictures are a joy, a true legacy is built not on images, but on quiet actions. It's built on selfless gifts that seek no praise, on sacrifices made in the shadows. The crowd grew still, leaning in. He began to speak of the new children's wing and of the anonymous angel who had made it all possible. He built the story masterfully, speaking of the donors' humility, of their insistence that their gift remain a secret. He said that for a long time he had honored that wish, believing that true charity needs no audience. He paused again, his eyes sweeping across the crowd before they settled on me. He said that sometimes a gift is so profound, so transformative, that to keep it a secret is to rob the community of the chance to fully express its gratitude. He said he believed this was one of those times. My heart was beating, a steady, heavy rhythm in my chest. This was it. His voice rang out clear and strong across the silent lawn. He announced that the anonymous donation of $1.2 million, the gift that built the beautiful haven for their children, came from a woman whose quiet faith and deep love for this community knew no bounds. He asked everyone to join him in finally thanking Mrs. Carol Miller. For a split second, there was nothing but a stunned collective intake of breath. Then the applause started. It wasn't a polite clap. It was a roar, a tidal wave of sound that washed over me. People were turning in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning admiration. I saw Kevin, the young photographer, his instincts taking over as his camera flash began to fire a series of strobing lights. His lens wasn't pointed at me, it was aimed directly at Mark and Amelia. In that merciless, repetitive flash of light, I saw their faces. The preening, self-satisfied smiles were gone, frozen into masks of pale, slack-jawed horror. Their perfect world had just been incinerated in public, and they were caught in the afterglow. As the applause continued, Pastor David motioned for me to stand. I rose slowly, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I didn't look at my son or his wife. I looked at the new building with the sun glinting off the windows, and I thought of Frank. I gave a small, simple nod to the crowd, a gesture of thanks. My calm, I knew, was the final nail in their social coffin. The sermon ended, but the event was not over. As the pastor stepped down, a crowd surged forward, but it was not toward him. The mayor, the head of the school board, the bank president, the very people Amelia had been so desperate to impress, pushed right past her. They came straight for me, their hands outstretched, their voices full of congratulations. The world rearranged itself right there on the church lawn. I was no longer the quiet peripheral grandmother, I was the matriarch. And as I was surrounded by the warmth and respect of my true community, I glanced over their shoulders. Mark and Amelia were standing utterly alone, a deserted island in a sea of people. The crowd had literally moved away from them, leaving them isolated in their shame. Their perfect picture was finally completely ruined. The drive home from the picnic was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, not the strained, angry kind I imagined was filling my son's car. Pastor David had insisted on driving me a kind gesture that also served as a final public statement of allegiance. When I walked into my empty house, the red light on my answering machine was blinking furiously. I pressed the button and listened as one by one the voices of my friends and neighbors filled the room, each one warmer than the last, all expressing their shock, their admiration, and their joy for me. Not a single message was from Mark or Amelia. My son finally called late that night. His voice was small, stripped of its usual confidence. He stumbled through an apology, saying over and over that he had no idea about the money, as if the size of the check was the actual point of his transgression. In the background, I could hear Amelia's sharp, whispered prompts, but she never came to the phone herself. I listened patiently, a quiet observer of his clumsy attempt at mending a bridge he hadn't realized was already burned. I told him I appreciated his call, my voice polite but distant. I offered no forgiveness, no easy words to soothe his conscience. I simply let his awkward apology hang in the air between us until he finally ran out of things to say. In the days that followed, it was like my whole world had been repainted in brighter colors. The story of the snub and the sermon, as I heard it called, had become something of a local legend. But it wasn't just gossip. It was a shift in the very foundation of my life. The following week, Pastor David called to formally invite me to join the church's board of trustees, a position of real influence I never would have been considered for before. Old friends, people who had drifted away over the years, began calling again, inviting me for lunch or for walks in the park. It seemed that without Amelia's shadow looming over me, I was visible again. People saw me, Carol Miller, not just as Mark's mother, or as a quiet widow, but as a force in my own right. The biggest change, however, was inside me. A lifetime of waiting for invitations of hoping to be included had simply evaporated. I stopped wondering if my son would call for Sunday dinner and started hosting my own. My dining room, which had been silent for so long, was suddenly filled with the laughter of my friends, my true family. I felt a sense of liberation that was so profound, it was almost dizzying. One of the first things I did was schedule a meeting with a new financial planner, a sharp young woman who listened intently as I laid out my plans. We began the process of creating the Frank and Carol Miller Foundation, a legal structure that would allow me to direct our legacy to support the causes we cared about and to ensure that our life's work would be a source of good in the world managed by my own hand. I was no longer a custodian of my late husband's fortune. I was its architect. Months passed. The leaves turned from green to gold, then fell, and the first hints of winter were in the air. The phone rang one Tuesday evening in November. It was Mark. His voice was hesitant, the voice of a child asking for a favor he knows he doesn't deserve. He said that Amelia was starting to plan for the holidays, and she was wondering. He stressed that it was her idea if I would be coming to their house for Christmas this year. It was a test, a final attempt, to see if the old power dynamic could be restored, if I could be pulled back into my designated role in their perfect picture. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment, not out of malice, but because I was considering my answer with genuine calm. Then I told him, my voice warm and kind, that it was sweet of him to ask. But I already had plans. Pastor David and his wife had invited me to join them, and we were going to be serving Christmas dinner to the families at the shelter, housed in the new children's wing. I wished him and his family a very Merry Christmas, and then I waited. All I heard from the other end of the line was the sound of his quiet, defeated breath. The new reality was permanent. The applause from that day at the picnic had finally faded, replaced by the beautiful, peaceful sound of my own life. And so Carol learned a powerful lesson that summer. She learned that when someone tries to cut you out of the picture, your true family are the ones who will build a new frame around you for the whole world to see. They don't just see your value. They reflect it back so brightly that it casts out all the shadows. She discovered that true strength isn't always about fighting your own battles alone, but about having the wisdom to trust the allies who have stood by you all along. And that's what real partnership looks like.